Hi everybody, today is the first video in ethical hacking training. We will talk about an introduction to ethical hacking. We will cover these objectives, understanding the importance of security nowadays, introducing ethical hacking and essential terminology for this module we will use during this module, understanding the different phases involved in an exploit by a hacker, an overview of attacks and an identification of exploit categories, and comprehending ethical hacking. So, can ethical hacking be ethical? To answer this question, we have to define first what is a hacker. Hacker refers to a person who enjoys learning the details of computer systems and stretch their capabilities, adding more features and make the code better and efficient. So the verb hacking describes the rapid redevelopment of new programs or the reverse engineering of already existing software to learn about how the software is working and try to make the code better and efficient. The term cracker refers to a person who uses his hacking skills for offensive purposes, for political purposes, and or to destroy or modify the sensitive information and so on. So these are the offensive purposes. The term ethical hacker refers to security professionals, and some people call them penetration testers, who apply their hacking skills for defensive purposes, because security is divided into either the offensive purposes or the offensive part, which are trying to attack and exploit any vulnerabilities found on the system, and the defensive purposes or the defensive side of the security, who are trying to protect and defend against attacks may happen to the systems. Sorry. Now we will talk about the essential terminologies that we will use during this module. The first terminology we will talk about today is the threat. Threat is anything that can take advantage of a vulnerability or a weakness in the system to breach the security and negatively alter or modify or erase, harm the object or objects of interest or the target system. So if the system have any kind of weakness or in the configuration or the architecture and so on, it can be a threat to breach the security and alter the information of the found in this target. Then now we'll talk about the vulnerability. What is the vulnerability? Vulnerability is existence of a weakness in the design or the implementation error that can lead to an unexpected or undesirable event compromising the security of the system and stealing sensitive information found on this target. Targeting of evaluation, and as any system, IT systems may be a web application or mobile application or even a network systems or a products or components that is identified or subjected to requiring security evaluation. We are trying to evaluate the security postures of these IT systems. Attack is any kind of malicious activity that attempts to collect, disrupt, deny, or destroy the information system, resources, or the information itself. So any attacking means that the attempts to collect or disrupt or to destroy the information of the system they are trying to attack. What is exploit? A defined way to breach the security of an IT system through a vulnerability. So most of vulnerabilities are exploitable because maybe you can find a vulnerability, but it's not exploitable. So exploit means that this vulnerability is exploitable and you can make use of it and gain an unauthorized access to the system and so on. So now we will talk about the elements of security. Security actually is trying to protect the sensitive information and infrastructure from the possibility of successful, undetected theft or tampering and disruption of the information and service. Any hacking event will affect one or more of the essential security elements. So what are the essential security elements? Security rests actually on confidentiality, authenticity, integrity, and availability. Here we will define each of these elements. Confidentiality is the concealment of information or resources to prevent any unauthorized access to sensitive information. So to access or read this document, for example, you have to be an authorized user and to be authorized to do so. Authenticity is the identification and assurance of the origin of information. So to access any information, you have to introduce and identify yourself to assure that you are the owner of this information and you are authorized to access this information. Integrity refers to the trustworthiness of the data or sources in terms of preventing improper and unauthorized changes. So any modification made to the integrity may to the data, may affect the integrity of this data, and then in this case the integrity is not maintained for this data. Availability refers to the ability to use the information or resources desired anytime from any location. So most of IT systems are available 24 hours, 7 days. So now we'll talk about what does a malicious hacker do. What are the phases that a hacker or a hacking process pass through? It will be 5 phases. The first phase is reconnaissance, which means that you are trying to gather more information, as much information as you can about the target. So this may be through an active reconnaissance, active gathering of information with direct interaction with the target system, or maybe massively without any direct interaction with the system. The second phase is scanning, try to uncover any vulnerabilities or weaknesses found on this system to try to exploit each of these vulnerabilities and gain an access to the system, which in the third phase, gaining access, will be the access gained be on the operating system level or applications level, maybe on the network level, or instead be a denial of service, kind of a denial of service to, for example, some attackers try to make a denial of service against the legitimate DNS server in the organization and to replace this legitimate DNS with their malicious DNS and start to redirect the employees to their malicious websites and start to steal information of these employees. Then we go through the next phase, which is maintaining access. After getting the access to the system, the attacker tries to maintain his access and stay as long as he can on this hacked system. Try to upload and altering or downloading programs like rootkits and trojans and so on to maintain his access maintaining his access to the system. Then the last phase is covering tracks to remove all the evidence of hack to avoid legal actions. So in this phase, it's trying to remove any evidence about the attack, so no one can detect him, and it will be faced the legal actions for this. Now we will go more deep inside each phase of these phases. The phase 1 is reconnaissance, as we said. Reconnaissance refers to the preparatory phase where an attacker seeks to gather as much information as he can about the target of the evaluation period to launching an attack. So the more information he will gather, the highest probability that this attack will be a successful attack, because he have know about more about the target and have a lot of information about the target. It involves network scanning, try to detect all the live hosts in this network. This may be external or internal, with inside the network itself, or external from the remote or internal from the internet. All this would be without any authorization for sure. The business risk for this phase is notable. generally noted as rattling the door comes to see if within someone is watching and responding or not. Could be future point of return when noted for ease of entry for an attack. So in the last phase, the covering tracks, he is trying to remove any notes about this entry and this unauthorized access, to remove any evidence about the attack when more is known as a proud scale about the target, because he know a lot of about the target, as we said, so he can successfully attack and get access to this. The reconnaissance, actually, there are many tools that can do reconnaissance, either with passive reconnaissance, involves monitoring network data for pattern and clues, this without any direct interaction with the target machine. Examples including sniffing using Wireshark, for example, to capture all the packets and the traffic running in the network and try to analyze and gather information as much as he can. And also it can be using the active reconnaissance tools, like involves probing the network to detect accessible hosts with big scans, for example, with using network map, or to detect open ports using network map as well, location of routers to map the network and get information about the network topology and so on, details of the operating system and surface running surfaces, and the versions of the, if it was a version scan using network map, he will be able to detect the version of the surface, then search for the common vulnerabilities for this version and start to gain access to the system. The second phase is the scanning. Scanning refers to pre-attack phase, because when the attacker scanned the network with the specific information gathered during the previous phase, reconnaissance, so now he have some information about the target, he have detected the open ports and running surface and so on, so he can start to check for the vulnerabilities for these surfaces according to the information he have gathered. Business risk for this phase is high. Hackers have to get a single point of entry to launch an attack, to check in all the vulnerabilities that were covered, and check which of these vulnerabilities are exploitable to start exploit it. It could be a point of exploit when the vulnerability of the system is detected. Scanning can include use of dialers, port scanners like network map, and other tools like network mapping, as we said, sweeping vulnerability scanners like Necto and Nessus and so on. The third phase is gaining access. After he gathered all the information from the previous phases and start to detect the vulnerabilities of the system, start to exploit any of these vulnerabilities, he will gain an access, unauthorized access. So getting access refers to the true attack phase. The hacker exploits the system using one of the vulnerabilities was detected from the previous phases. The exploit can occur over a LAN, locally, internet, or offline, as an exception of theft. Examples including stack buffer overflow or denial of service attacks, which means that he starts to send a huge number of requests to the server until the resources of the server can't handle all these huge number of the requests, and then it will be down. So he can replace, for example, some attackers do this to replace the legitimate DNS server in the organization with the malicious DNS server by making a denial of service attack on the legitimate DNS server of the organization. Then he starts to redirect all the employees in this organization to his malicious websites and start to maintain and gain access to all the network devices. So it also contains getting access means also session hijacking to steal the session of the legitimate user and start to communicate with the server impersonating the legitimate user, or password filtering to start to crack the passwords and gain and maintain your access to the server and your target system. Influencing factors including architecture and misconfiguration of the target system, because any misconfiguration like using default passwords, don't have any firewalls or intrusion prevention system or intrusion detection systems and so on, may cause this attack or this phase to be successful. Also depends on the skill level of the attacker and the initial level of access obtained, according, as I said, according to the accuracy of the number of information, you have gathered in the previous phases. This will be a successful attack. Business risk in this phase is for sure is highest, because the hacker can gain access to the operating system level, can change any configuration of the operating system level and or the application level, to take the full control of the application or the network, the entire network for sure. The fourth phase is the maintaining access. Maintaining access refers to the phase when the hacker tries to retain his ownership of the system. He have gained the access and he wants to stay as long as he can, to steal more information and steal more sensitive information and start to gather more information about other network devices in the network. So maintaining access refers to the phase when the hacker tries to retain his ownership of the system, because now he is the real owner of the system. The hacker has exploited a vulnerability for sure to gain an access and start to maintain his access, and can tamper and compromise the system and other system in the network. Sometimes hackers also harden the system from other hackers, so no one can hack this system again, and he become the real owner of the system. He owns the system by securing their exclusive access using backdoors, rootkits, Trojans, and other stuffs that can secure the system and against any hackers trying to hack this system. Hackers can upload files like rootkits and backdoors and so on, can download any sensitive information, can manipulate data and change the values in the database, for example, if it was a database server, change the application, the configuration of the own system, because he now can do whatever he wants. The last phase is covering tracks. Covering tracks refers to the activities undertaken by the hacker to extend his misuse of the system without being detected, because the main goal for any hacker is to keep undetectable by anyone. So this phase he tried to cover all his tracks. So reasons include need for to stay more and more long time in the system and steal more information and steal more information from other network devices, continued use of resources, and start to include this device to his hacking devices, botnets and so on, removing evidence of any hacking happened, avoiding legal actions, as we said before. This can be done through many examples, like the steganography, so which means embed the malicious payload inside other files, looks normal like GPGs or the documents files, using tunneling like VPN or Tor or proxy chains and many other tools that can do this job for us, or altering the log files, or may sometimes remove the log at all, or alter the log records and change and remove the real time that he was entered and so on. Hackers can remain undetectable for long periods, or use the phase to start a fresh reconnaissance to related target system in the network. Now we will talk about hacker classes. There are different classes for hackers. The black hats, which are individuals with explanatory computing skills resorting to malicious or destructive activities to try to hack systems and to destroy data or alter the data for an offensive purposes. The opposite individuals are the white hats, which are individuals professional hackers skills and using them for a defensive purpose, try to protect organizations and secure their data, sensitive data. There are one between these post classes, which is the gray hat, individuals who work on both offensively and defensively. They are the gray hats. Ethical hackers classes also may be former black hats. There are reformed crackers. First, as we said, for the offensive side or the offensive purposes. White hats can be independent security consultant or groups, and there are consulting firms that can do ethical hacking jobs. Now we will talk about hacktivism, which refers to hacking with a cause for uncensored purposes, like compromise of hackers with a social or political agenda, or aims to sending across a message through their hacking activity and gaining visibility of their cause and themselves, which maybe he wants to be famous or taking revenge from someone. So any offensive purposes will be fall under the hacktivism terminology. Common targets include government agencies, some others entities were received for a wrong these groups or individuals. It remains fact, however, that gaining any unauthorized access for any the target system is a crime, no matter what the intent of this. So what do ethical hackers do? There is a famous quote which is called, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not to fear the results of the 100 battles. The ethical hackers tries to answer some questions to do their jobs efficiently. The first question they ask, which is what can the intruder see on the target system? If he is trying, some intruder is trying to gather information about the system and make a scanning with the scanning tools, as we said in the phases. So what will the information that will appear on the target system? Then the second question will be what can an intruder do with that information, gaining access or maintaining access and so on. So you have to answer these questions to help the organization to protect itself against different cyber attacks. The third question is, does anyone at the target noted the intruder's attempts or the success? You have to check the logs and all the evidence about the attack. So maybe the attacker covered the tracks and alter the logs and remove any evidence about the hack. If hired by any organization, an ethical hacker asks the organization what is it trying to protect, what are the data they are trying to protecting them against whom, the enemies or not, and what are the resources it's willing to expend in order to gain protection, because ethical hacking and protection of the sensitive data will cost the organization much money, so they have to determine what is willing to expend in order to gain the protection. What are the skill profile of an ethical hacker? Computer experts for sure have a good technical knowledge, in-depth knowledge about the target platforms like Windows and Unix and Linux and so on, because no organization don't have Windows or Linux as their operating systems for their devices. Good knowledge in networking in order to make a penetration testing or ethical hacking on something. You don't know how it is working. This will be very hard, so you have to go to have a good knowledge about networking and related hardware and software issues, knowledge about the security areas, because you are going to secure the data, so you must have a good knowledge how to secure your data. How do they go about it? Security evaluation involves three components. In any organization, they must have a preparation first, and the conduct and conclusion phase. In preparation phase, this phase, a formal contract is signed, which they contain a non-disclosure clause and a legal clause to protect the ethical hacking against any legal actions, and that may attract during the conduct phase, because he will have access to sensitive information about the organization. So this clause must be a legal clause, must be included in the contract to protect him against any prosecutions or any legal actions that may take after that. The contract also outlines the infrastructure perimeter, the scope of the work, what are the devices, for example, that we will scan, and the networks we will scan. They outline the infrastructure perimeter and evaluation activities, the scope of work, as I said, and the time frame or time schedule and resources available to him to start to protect them. The conduct phase is the second phase, which is the evaluation technical report is prepared. He tried to scan and uncover all the vulnerabilities found in this organization and start to include this in a detailed report. This will be in the conclusion phase, which in the results of the evaluation is communicated to the organization or sponsors, and corrective advice or actions is taken if needed. If there is a risk or there are a lot of vulnerabilities, you have much take actions to protect the organization against cyber attacks. Mode of the ethical hacking. There are different modes. Remote network, which is this mode attempts to simulate an intruder launch an attack over the internet. So it will be a remote attack, or maybe a remotely dial-up network. This mode attempts to simulate an intruder launching an attack against the client's modem pools. Also, it may be local network. From the local network, this mode simulates an employee with a legal access gaining unauthorized access over the local network. So he has legal access actually to his own device only, but this mode he is trying to gain an unauthorized access to another local network device. So this is a mode of unethical hacking. Or the other type, which is stolen equipment. This mode simulates theft of a critical information like a laptop owned by a manager or something or like this, taken by the client or unaware of its owner and given to the ethical hacker to try to test it. There is a common mode for ethical hacking, which is social engineering. This aspect attempts to check the integrity and the loyalty of the employees to the organization, try to check educated users about the security risks and so on. So social engineering, sending them like phishing attacks and so on, which is sending him a malicious link and ask the employees to click on where he can steal their sensitive information. Physical entry. This is the last mode, which is attempts to physically compromise the organization by checking the infrastructure of this organization. Security test. There are two types of security testing. Maybe a black box or a white box. Black box, the penetration tester or the ethical hacker doesn't have any barrier in knowledge of the infrastructure to be tested. The opposite is the white box, which is with a complete knowledge of the network infrastructure. The ethical hacker have all the knowledge about the network. There are something in between these two types, which is internal testing, is known as gray box testing, and this examines the extent of access by insiders within the network, how to gain access about have a partial information about the infrastructure of the network. There are many different forms of security testing, including development scanning, ethical hacking, and penetration testing. So security testing mainly can be conducted using one of the two approaches, black box and white box. Deliverables, for sure, an ethical hacking report, detailed report that will detail the results of the hacking activity, matching it against the work schedule and decided barrier to all the conduct phase. As we said, on the three phases, preparation and conduct and conclusion. Vulnerabilities are detailed in this report, and avoidance measures suggested. The recommendation to how to secure and protect yourself is usually delivered in a hard copy format for a security reason. Issues to consider: non-disclosure clause in the legal contract, availing the right information to the right person, so no one can access and see this report. It is very high security and high sensitive information, so not availing the right information to the right person. Integrity of the evaluation team and sensitivity of information for sure is very important. So we have discovered security is critical across sectors and industries. No organization now must take care of their security of their data. Ethical hacking is a methodology to simulate malicious attacks without causing damage. So it is a kind of penetration testing and to evaluate the security posture of any organization. Hacking involves 5 distinct phases: reconnaissance, scanning and gaining access, maintaining access, and covering the tracks. Security evaluation includes preparation, conduct, and evaluation phase. Thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, you can contact me on WhatsApp. Thank you.